New Zealand says goodbye to Jacinda Ardern. She was the world's youngest female prime minister. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, lesson number 546. At Plain English, we help you, the English learner, upgrade your skills with lessons about current events and trending topics. The audio in this version is a little slower, so you can catch every word. If you're really ready for a challenge, you can get the fast version as part of our membership at plainenglish.com. And the fast version is a fresh recording, and I record the lesson just as if I were talking to a native speaker. JR is the producer of Plain English. He produces both versions, and he uploads all the resources for this lesson to plainenglish.com/546. Coming up today, you're learning English, and so today we'll turn our attention to one corner of the English-speaking world that isn't frequently in the spotlight. Jacinda Ardern was the world's youngest country leader when she took over as New Zealand's Prime Minister in 2017. Early in her term, she was extremely popular. Jacinda Mania, they called it. But she has recently stepped down, and not because she lost, not from a term limit, and not because of a scandal. Today, we'll reflect on the Kiwi leader who was one of the world's most popular democratic leaders. In the second half of the lesson, I'll show you what it means to overstay your welcome, not something you want to do. And we have a quote of the week. Let's get going. There's a rule in show business: always leave them wanting more. Show business is another term for entertainment. So if you're a comedian, an actor, a magician, a band, the rule is the same. Leave the stage while the crowd still loves you. Leave them wanting more, because that's better than the alternative, which is overstaying your welcome. The rule in politics seems to be the opposite. Country leaders often overstay their welcome, especially in parliamentary systems without term limits. Stephen Harper was Prime Minister of Canada for 9 years. Tony Blair held the top job in the UK for a full decade. There are many good things you can say about Angela Merkel, but she didn't leave them wanting more. She was Chancellor of Germany for 16 years. So it came as a surprise that New Zealand's young, popular Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern resigned her office despite high personal popularity. I have always had a lot of respect for Ardern. She's just a year older than I am. She's 42. And she became Prime Minister of her country at age 37, the world's youngest female country leader. Less than a year after taking office, she gave birth to her daughter and then took 6 weeks maternity leave. The Prime Minister of her country went on maternity leave for over a month. She handed her duties to the Deputy Prime Minister for those 6 weeks. New Zealand is a safe country that has not frequently confronted terrorism or mass shootings, but in March 2019, a gunman opened fire in a mosque in Christchurch, the country's second biggest city. 51 people were killed, a devastating death toll. That this targeted Muslims, a religious minority, was also a shock in tolerant New Zealand. Ardern responded with compassion for the victims. She visited Christchurch, talked to family members and first responders, and declared a period of national mourning. She wore a headscarf herself and said, "They are us," describing the victims. This was not an empty gesture. Her words and actions were received as genuine in New Zealand's Muslim community and around the world. A photograph of her hugging a Muslim worshiper was projected onto the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building in Dubai. She backed up her words with actions. A month later, she helped pass new firearms laws restricting semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles. Then came COVID. New Zealand is an island nation far away from many other places, so it had the luxury of responding differently than, say, European countries did. In the very earliest days of the international pandemic, March 23, 2020, Ardern made the decision to go hard and go early. She asked New Zealanders living and traveling abroad to come home. She rallied her team of 5 million, referring to the 5 million people who live in New Zealand. There were harsh restrictions on movement, but they came with social support to prevent evictions and other hardships. Compliance was high. This was hard on New Zealanders living abroad. Many were unable to return home for long periods of time. But New Zealand did what many other countries hoped to do. They flattened the curve. With the help of their geography, they delayed the spread of the virus. Kiwis, as New Zealanders are called, avoided the worst of the early rounds of COVID, and they got vaccinated in the meantime. Ardern's leadership and the sacrifice of New Zealanders saved many, many lives. Ardern was rewarded with a large majority in Parliament in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. In her second term, she continued to confront COVID. She navigated strained relations with China, a major trading partner, and she joined sanctions against Russia. But her country wearied of COVID policies and started to sour on her Labour Party, though Ardern herself remains popular. The next election will be in October of this year. At her party's conference in January, she said she had found time for reflection, and she determined that she wasn't the right leader for the party going into the next election. She would resign, letting someone else lead her party. She said that being prime minister requires a full tank plus a bit in reserve for those unexpected challenges. But she didn't have a full tank anymore, and she said New Zealand deserved a prime minister ready to face the country's next challenges. In the last few years, New Zealand has seen an increase in political extremism, protests, and harsh online rhetoric. A lot of nasty rhetoric has been directed at Ardern herself. The country has also experienced high housing inflation. A lot of Kiwis cannot afford to buy or rent a home. New Zealand relies on labor from abroad, including temporary workers, but few were able to immigrate during the pandemic years, leading to a labor shortage and higher prices for everything. Gang violence has increased. Homelessness remains a problem. High-profile crimes are up too. Ram raids involve people driving cars through shop windows at night and then looting the shops. There were 500 of those in 2022. Jacinda mania has faded, but Ardern herself is still popular. It's a different story for her party. For the first time in ages, the Labour Party is trailing its main right-wing opposition in the polls. With a vigorous campaign and fresh policies, Labour can still win later this year, but it will have to do so with a new leader, Chris Hickpins. He was in charge of New Zealand's response to COVID. I know as an outsider, you can't get the full story, and I don't have much of an opinion on her domestic policies, but I have always thought she's been a great country leader, a great example. Of course, it helps to be the leader of a small country rather than a big one with so many competing interests. It reminded me of a good series on Netflix called Borden. It's a political drama, but takes place in Denmark. It's about the rise of a working mom as prime minister. Totally fiction, but it's good. There are a few seasons. It's called Borden on Netflix. Overstay your welcome. You're going to have to be very careful with this expression. To overstay your welcome means to stay in a place longer than other people want you there. I say you have to be careful because it's not a great thing to say directly to another person, but I am going to show you exactly how to use it today, so don't worry. First, a few easy examples. If you invite some friends over to dinner and you start at, say, 8 p.m., what time do you think your friends should go home? Well, everyone has a different idea. As a guest, you have to start to read the signals. I would think that by 11 o'clock, unless you're specifically invited to stay longer, by 11 o'clock, you should be getting ready to leave. Sometimes earlier, it all depends on the situation. But this isn't always 100% clear, and some people aren't good at reading the signals. So maybe it's 11:30 and you've put the drinks away. You start to clear the table, put the dishes in the sink. You don't contribute much to the conversation. You check your watch. You start to yawn. Maybe you yawn twice in a row. But midnight rolls around, then 12:30, the guests are still there. They are overstaying their welcome. They are there longer than you want them to be there. They were welcome at 8 o'clock. You wanted them there then. You invited them. They were welcome at 9 o'clock, but they overstayed their welcome. They stayed longer than you wanted them to stay. But you don't say this directly to them. That's offensive. You might say that to other people. You might say, wow, by like midnight, they were really starting to overstay their welcome. But like I said, you can't say that directly to them. That's rude. Instead, you can say, wow, I'm starting to get tired, aren't you? Or you can say, I think we need to get to bed soon. You can say, thanks so much for coming. I had a great time, but I need to get some rest. But you cannot tell your guests they have overstayed their welcome. That is very rude. Still, there might come a time when you have to say this. You've tried everything to get someone to leave. Imagine you have a friend, not a close friend, but someone is staying at your house. You invited them to stay for a few days, but now it's going into the third week. You've tried everything. If you want that person out, you might have to say, listen, I'm afraid you might be starting to overstay your welcome. But I'm telling you, if you say this, the friendship might be over. Your overstaying your welcome is another way of saying get out. Now, there is a way to use this referring to yourself. There are some times when you are not sure whether you, as the guest, should stay somewhere for a long time. And in those cases, you can tell your host, I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome. That means you're giving your host permission to tell you exactly how long you can stay. And in this case, it's not impolite. You're talking about yourself. In fact, it's an invitation to make the expectations clearer. Imagine your friends have a house by a lake and they invite you to stay for a weekend. Everything is going great. On Sunday afternoon, you were starting to get ready to go home, and the friends say, hey, you can work remotely. Why don't you stay here for a few more days? You hesitate. You've never stayed longer than 2 nights before. Are your friends saying this just to be polite? Do they really want you to spend a few more days? So here's something you can say. I would love to spend more time with you, but I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome. That's an invitation to your hosts to be a little more honest about how long they want you there. So your hosts might reply, of course, why don't you stay until Tuesday? and that gives you the clarity that you're welcome until Tuesday. You don't have to worry about overstaying your welcome. You've specifically said you don't want to overstay your welcome, and they specifically told you that you're welcome until Tuesday. In today's lesson, we talked about people in the public eye that can overstay their welcome. I said in show business, you want to leave them wanting more. You want to walk off the stage or retire or whatever while people still love you. That's better than the opposite, which is to overstay your welcome. In show business, obviously, people can leave a theater, not buy a movie ticket, not watch a show, but you know what I mean. Some politicians and celebrities just hang around long after they're popular. I told you about the show Succession on HBO. There have been 3 seasons, and there's a 4th coming out. There are no plans yet to do any more, though the show has not been canceled. The actor who plays the main character said he doesn't want Succession to overstay its welcome. That means they won't keep making more and more seasons and watch the quality and popularity decline. I think The Office overstayed its welcome, the American version. There were 9 seasons, but Steve Carell left after season 7. The last 2 seasons, let me tell you, they were struggling. The Office definitely overstayed its welcome. It's time for a quote of the week. Here it is from the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. This is about prioritizing time to think rather than just acting and reacting all the time. I think it goes nicely with today's topic about Jacinda Ardern too. She sets a good example. Here again is Blaise Pascal. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Well, that's all for today's Plain English. This was lesson number 546. So the full lesson is available at plainenglish.com/546. Remember, the full lesson includes the transcript, some additional vocabulary, a step-by-step video walkthrough, and much more. plainenglish.com/546. We'll be back with a new lesson on Thursday. See you then.